You know, they say revenge is a dish best served cold. But in my case, it was served at room temperature, spoiling right there on the shelves for everyone to see. Let me back up. My name is Elena, and I'm 32 years old. 5 years ago, I was this bright-eyed pharmaceutical scientist who thought hard work and talent were enough to make it in the corporate world. God, was I naive. I just finished my PhD in biochemistry at Northwestern, and I was drowning in student loans, about $87,000, to be exact. My parents had helped as much as they could, but Dad's construction business had taken a hit during the recession, and Mom was working 2 part-time jobs just to keep their own heads above water. I was living in this tiny studio apartment in Chicago, eating ramen noodles for dinner more nights than I care to admit. When Peterson Pharmaceuticals offered me a position in their cosmetics division at $65,000 a year, I jumped at it. Sure, it wasn't the medical research I dreamed of. I'd always imagined myself developing treatments for cancer or Alzheimer's, but it was a foot in the door at a Fortune 500 company. My advisor at Northwestern had warned me that the transition from academic research to corporate R&D could be jarring, but I figured I was tough enough to handle it. The first few months were overwhelming. The corporate culture was so different from university life. Everything moved faster, deadlines were non-negotiable, and there was this constant pressure to show measurable results. I remember my first performance review. Marcus sat across from me in his office, flipping through my evaluation form with this serious expression. "Elena, your technical skills are exceptional," he said, "but you need to understand that this isn't academia. We're not publishing papers here. We're developing products that need to work in the real world, for real consumers, at real price points." I nodded eagerly, desperate to prove I could adapt. "I understand, Marcus. I'm ready to focus on practical applications." He smiled then, and I felt this wave of relief. "Good. Because I see real potential in you. The company needs scientists who can bridge the gap between theoretical knowledge and commercial success." The lab was everything I'd imagined. State-of-the-art equipment, unlimited research budgets, and the chance to work on products that millions of people would use. I threw myself into the work completely. While my colleagues left at 5 sharp, I'd stay until 9 or 10, running tests, analyzing data, perfecting formulations. My supervisor was this guy named Marcus Webb. Mid-40s, perfectly styled hair, always wore these expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had this way of making you feel like you were part of something important, you know? He'd stop by my station and say things like, "Elena, your attention to detail is exactly what this company needs," or, "Keep this up and you'll be running your own lab in no time." I believed him. I actually believed him. For 3 years, I worked on various projects: anti-aging creams, acne treatments, moisturizers. Nothing groundbreaking, but I was learning, building my reputation. My colleagues were mostly friendly, though I noticed there was this unspoken hierarchy. The senior scientists got the interesting projects, while people like me worked on incremental improvements to existing formulas. There was this one woman, Jennifer, who'd been there for about 8 years. She took me under her wing during those early months, showing me the ropes, explaining the office politics I was too naive to recognize on my own. "The key to surviving here," she told me over coffee one afternoon, "is to make yourself indispensable. Don't just do your job, anticipate what needs to be done next." I took that advice to heart. I started volunteering for extra projects, staying late to help other departments, even organizing the lab supply inventory on my own time. I thought I was building goodwill, proving my dedication. Jennifer watched me with this knowing look. "You're working awfully hard, Elena. Just be careful about who gets the credit for all that extra effort." I should have listened more carefully to that warning. Then everything changed when the company announced they were pivoting toward luxury skincare. They wanted something revolutionary, something that would put Peterson Pharmaceuticals on the map in the high-end cosmetics market. The pressure was intense. We're talking about a potential $200 million market launch. The board had already allocated $30 million just for the initial production run. Marcus held these weekly meetings where he'd pace around the conference room, talking about quarterly projections and market dominance. The whole thing felt like we were preparing for war. I started working 18-hour days. My apartment became this place I'd crash for a few hours before heading back to the lab. My friends stopped calling because I was never available. My mom would leave these concerned voicemails that I'd listen to while pipetting solutions at midnight. "Mija, you sound exhausted. she'd say in that worried tone that made my chest tight. Are you eating enough? Are you sleeping? This job shouldn't be killing you. But I couldn't explain to her that this felt like my one shot to prove myself. That every other scientist in the division was working just as hard, and if I didn't push myself to the limit, someone else would get the breakthrough instead. The isolation was the hardest part. I'd always been social, but now I was spending entire weekends in the lab. I missed my best friend's wedding because I was in the middle of a crucial experiment. I canceled dates, skipped family gatherings, put my entire life on hold. One night, around 2 in the morning, I was sitting in the empty lab when the security guard made his rounds. He was this older guy named Frank who'd been working there for about 15 years. "You're here late again, Doc," he said, peering at my workstation. "What's got you so tied up?" I looked up from my microscope, probably looking as exhausted as I felt. Just trying to crack a particularly stubborn formula. The deadline's coming up fast. Frank nodded thoughtfully. "I've seen a lot of scientists come and go through here. The ones who burn themselves out like this. Sometimes they get the breakthrough, sometimes they don't. But they always pay a price for it." "What do you mean?" "Well, there's winning the battle and winning the war. Make sure you know which one you're fighting." At the time, I thought he was just being philosophical. I wish I'd understood what he really meant. But I had an idea. See, most cosmetic products focus on surface-level improvements, temporary hydration, short-term firmness. I wanted to create something that would actually stimulate cellular regeneration at the molecular level. Not just make your skin look better, but actually make it healthier. I spent months researching peptide combinations, studying how different compounds interact with skin cells. I tested hundreds of formulations, each one getting me closer to something truly innovative. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night in March. I was working alone in the lab when I finally cracked it. I'd been struggling with this one particular peptide chain that kept degrading too quickly. I'd tried dozens of different approaches, adjusting pH levels, changing the concentration ratios, experimenting with different delivery mechanisms. Nothing was working. Then I remembered something from my graduate research, a paper I'd read about enzymatic stability in cellular environments. It was a completely different field, but the principle was the same. I started thinking about how to create a protective environment for the peptides, something that would allow them to remain active long enough to penetrate the skin barrier. That's when I had my eureka moment. Instead of trying to make the peptides more stable, what if I created a delivery system that would protect them until they reached their target? I spent the next 6 hours developing a completely new approach, a microencapsulation technique that would release the active ingredients in stages. The first test was promising. The second test was exciting. By the third test, I knew I had something special. The results were incredible. Not just good. Revolutionary. We're talking about cellular regeneration at a level I'd never seen before. Under the microscope, I could actually watch skin cells responding to the treatment, becoming more elastic, more resilient. It was like watching biology in fast forward. The formula was elegant in its simplicity. A combination of bioactive peptides, natural enzymes, and a proprietary delivery system that would penetrate the skin barrier more effectively than anything on the market. But here's the thing, and this is important. The formula required a very specific stabilizing agent. Without it, the active ingredients would break down within 72 hours. I called it Compound BX7. It was inexpensive, maybe added 12 cents to the production cost per unit, but it was absolutely crucial. Without BX7, the product would start developing this grayish tint and eventually smell like spoiled milk. Not exactly what you want in a luxury skincare product. I was so excited I could barely sleep. I ran the final tests, documented everything meticulously, and prepared my presentation. This was it, my moment to prove myself, to show the company what I could do. The next morning, I knocked on Marcus's office door. He looked up from his computer with that practiced smile he used for everyone. "Elena, just the person I wanted to see. What do you have for me?" I handed him the complete formula, along with all my research notes and test results. "I think we've got something special here, Marcus. The preliminary tests are incredible. 93% improvement in skin elasticity, 87% reduction in fine lines after just 4 weeks of use." He flipped through the pages, his eyes lighting up. This is exactly what we need. Elena, you might have just saved the entire project." I felt this rush of pride, Like all those late nights and missed social events had finally paid off. I've included detailed manufacturing instructions and all the necessary safety protocols. The key is the stabilizing agent, BX7. It's crucial for shelf stability. Marcus nodded absently, still reading. Right. Let me review this thoroughly and present it to the board. Great work, Elena. Really outstanding. I walked out of his office feeling like I was floating. Finally, my hard work was going to be recognized. I imagined presenting the formula to the board myself, maybe getting that promotion to senior scientist I'd been hoping for. 2 weeks later, Marcus called an all-hands meeting. The entire cosmetics division crammed into the main conference room. I sat in the back, practically vibrating with excitement. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, his voice carrying that confident tone I'd come to associate with big announcements. I'm proud to present our breakthrough product, Formula X. After months of intensive research and development, I've created a revolutionary skincare solution that will redefine the luxury cosmetics market. I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. He was presenting my formula, my months of work, my breakthrough, my discovery, and he was calling it his own. I looked around the room, hoping to catch someone's eye, hoping someone would recognize the injustice of what was happening. But my colleagues were all focused on Marcus, nodding appreciatively at his brilliance. Jennifer was sitting 2 seats away from me, and I could see her taking notes, completely absorbed in the presentation. He clicked through slides that showed my test results, my molecular diagrams, my research data. Everything except my name. There was my microencapsulation technique, described as an innovative delivery system I developed. There were my peptide combinations, labeled as proprietary formulations I created. There was even my handwriting on some of the original lab notes, but somehow those were presented as collaborative documentation. I felt this surreal disconnect, like I was watching someone else's life being stolen in real time. Marcus was explaining the science with this confident authority, but I could hear the slight hesitation in his voice when he got to the technical details. He understood the results, but he didn't really understand the process. The key innovation, he was saying, is the staged release mechanism. By protecting the active ingredients in a specialized delivery matrix, we've achieved unprecedented bioavailability. That was my language, my terminology, my explanation of a process I'd spent months perfecting. When he got to the slide showing projected market impact, the room got noticeably more attentive. Conservative estimates suggest this product could capture 8% of the luxury skincare market within 18 months. That translates to approximately $40 million in revenue in the first quarter alone. $40 million. From my work, my discovery, my sleepless nights and sacrificed weekends. The board has approved immediate production, Marcus continued. We're looking at a full market launch in 8 weeks. This formula will generate an estimated $40 million in revenue in the first quarter alone. $40 million. From my work, my discovery. After the meeting, I approached Marcus. My hands were shaking, but I tried to keep my voice steady. Marcus, that was my formula. My research. He looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before. Cold, calculating. Elena, everything developed in this lab belongs to Peterson Pharmaceuticals. You're part of a team. We all contributed to this success. We all contributed? I worked alone on this for 6 months. That's my molecular structure, my testing protocol, Your work was based on company resources, company time, company equipment. The patent will reflect the company's ownership, as it should. He paused, then smiled that same practice smile. Besides, you'll be compensated fairly. There's a $1,500 bonus in your next paycheck. $1,500. For a formula that would generate millions. I stood there for a moment, trying to process what he'd just said. Marcus, you presented my work as your own. That's not about company ownership, that's about taking credit for something you didn't create. His smile faded slightly. Elena, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of corporate research. I oversee this division. The work that comes out of here is ultimately my responsibility, which means it's also my achievement. That's how leadership works. Leadership? You didn't even know what BX7 was until I explained it to you, The moment the words left my mouth, I saw his expression change. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe even a hint of fear. He recovered quickly, but not quickly enough. "I think you're getting emotional about this," he said, his voice taking on a patronizing tone. "Why don't you take the rest of the day off? Get some perspective. We'll talk more when you've had time to process." I wanted to argue, to fight back, to demand justice. But I could see in his face that it wouldn't matter. He'd already made his decision, and nothing I said was going to change it. But the real blow came the next day. I found a transfer notice on my desk. Effective immediately, I was being moved to the quality control department. Basically a dead-end position where I'd spend my days testing the pH levels of existing products. The same products I'd been improving and innovating for years. I tried to fight it. I went to HR, explained the situation, showed them my research notes. But Marcus had already spun the story. According to him, I was a difficult team player who was struggling to adapt to collaborative environments. He'd positioned my transfer as a developmental opportunity to help me gain perspective on the production process. The HR representative, this woman named Patricia, looked at me with these sympathetic eyes and said, "Elena, I understand you're disappointed, but Mr. Webb has specifically requested this transfer to help you grow professionally. It's really an opportunity." An opportunity. Right. So there I was, relegated to a windowless quality control lab, testing the same products day after day while Marcus basked in the glory of his breakthrough. He got promoted to division head, complete with a corner office and a company car. I heard through the grapevine that he'd received a $50,000 bonus for the Formula X development. The quality control lab was like purgatory. 8 hours a day of routine testing, pH levels, viscosity measurements, color consistency checks. Work that could have been done by a technician, but they positioned it as developmental experience for me. My new supervisor was this guy named Tom who'd been doing quality control for 20 years and seemed genuinely confused about why someone with my credentials was working under him. "Dr. Rodriguez," he said on my first day, "I've looked at your background, and I have to say, I'm not sure what you're doing here. This is pretty basic stuff." "Apparently I need to gain perspective on the production process," I replied, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Tom looked at me with this expression that was part sympathy, part confusion. "Well, I guess everyone has their reasons. Just don't expect this to be intellectually stimulating." He wasn't wrong. After months of cutting-edge research, I was now spending my days running tests that followed step-by-step procedures. No creativity, no problem-solving, no innovation. Just following protocols and recording data. The worst part was watching my former colleagues move forward with their careers while I was stuck in this dead-end position. Jennifer got promoted to senior scientist. Another colleague, Robert, was assigned to lead a new anti-aging project. Even the recent hires were getting more interesting work than me. I ate lunch alone most days, sitting in the corner of the cafeteria while my former teammates discussed their current projects. Sometimes I'd catch fragments of conversation about Formula X, about production timelines and market projections. It was like hearing about someone else's life. A life that should have been mine. But here's the thing, and this is where my story gets interesting. I'm not the type of person who takes injustice lying down. As I sat in that quality control lab, testing batch after batch of mediocre products, I started thinking about that meeting. About how Marcus had presented my formula. And I realized something. In all his excitement about stealing my work, Marcus had overlooked one crucial detail. The formula he'd presented to the board, the one they'd approved for production, was missing something. Something small but absolutely essential. The stabilizing agent. BX7. See, in my original notes, I'd mentioned BX7 on a separate page, clearly labeled as critical stabilizing component. But Marcus, in his rush to claim credit, had apparently skipped over that page. He'd focused on the flashy results, the impressive molecular diagrams, the projected benefits. He'd missed the boring technical details that actually made the formula work. I sat there in quality control, watching batch after batch of Formula X being produced and shipped to warehouses across the country. The irony was delicious. They were manufacturing 1 million units of a product that would start spoiling within 72 hours of production. Every day, I'd see the production reports cross my desk. Batch 001 through 157, each one containing thousands of units of my unstable formula. The manufacturing facility was working overtime to meet the launch deadline, pushing out unit after unit of a product that was fundamentally flawed. I found myself doing mental calculations. If they were producing 10,000 units per batch, and each batch took about 6 hours to complete, that meant they were creating a continuous stream of products that would start degrading almost immediately. The math was fascinating in the most twisted way. The shipping schedules were public information within the company. I could see exactly when each batch was leaving the facility, which warehouses they were going to, how long they'd sit in storage before being distributed to retail locations. It was like watching a slow-motion disaster unfold, knowing exactly when and where the bomb would go off. During my lunch breaks, I'd sometimes walk by the production floor and watch the workers carefully packaging each unit of Formula X. They had no idea they were handling a ticking time bomb. The packaging was beautiful. Elegant white containers with gold accents, designed to convey luxury and sophistication. It made the whole situation even more surreal. The first signs appeared about a week after the initial shipment. I was in the break room when I overheard two shipping coordinators talking. "Hey, did you hear about the returns from the Chicago warehouse?" "Returns? Already? The product just shipped last week." "Yeah, apparently some of the units are developing this weird discoloration. Gray streaks or something." I nearly choked on my coffee. It was starting. Over the next few days, the reports multiplied. Warehouses in New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, all reporting the same issue. The product was developing an unsightly gray tint, and worse, it was starting to smell. Not just bad, but like spoiled milk mixed with rotten eggs. The company went into crisis mode. Marcus held emergency meetings, brought in external consultants, even flew in a specialist from their European division. But nobody could figure out what was wrong. The formula looked perfect on paper, the production process was following all protocols, the quality control tests were showing normal results. That's because the quality control tests were designed to check for immediate defects, not long-term stability. By the time the deterioration was detectable, the products were already in warehouses and, increasingly, in stores. The media coverage was brutal. "Peterson Pharmaceuticals' luxury launch turns into nightmare," read the headline in the Wall Street Journal. Beauty blogs were calling it the Great Cosmetic Catastrophe of 2023. Social media was flooded with videos of people opening containers of Formula X only to find gray, foul-smelling mush. I remember watching one particularly viral TikTok video where this beauty influencer opened a container of Formula X live on camera. She'd been talking about how excited she was to try this revolutionary new product, how she'd been waiting weeks for it to arrive. Then she opened the container and this horrified expression crossed her face. "Oh my God," she said, holding the container away from her face. "This smells like rotten eggs mixed with sour milk. And look at the color, it's supposed to be white, but it's all gray and chunky." The video got 3 million views in 2 days. The comments were even worse than the visual. People were calling Peterson Pharmaceuticals a scam company and demanding refunds. Some were joking about it, but others were genuinely concerned about safety issues. The beauty industry press was having a field day. How Peterson Pharmaceuticals' wonder product became a nightmare was trending on every major beauty blog. Trade publications were running in-depth analyses of what could have gone wrong. Some were speculating about contamination in the manufacturing process, others were questioning the company's quality control procedures. But the most damaging coverage came from the business press. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story about the recall, complete with quotes from industry analysts about the long-term impact on Peterson's reputation. Forbes published an article titled, "When Innovation Goes Wrong: The Peterson Pharmaceuticals Debacle." The company's PR team was working overtime, issuing statements about isolated quality issues and comprehensive investigations. But you can't spin away the reality of 1 million units of spoiled product sitting in warehouses and stores across the country. The company stock dropped by 18% in a single day. We're talking about a market cap loss of nearly $200 million. The board called for an emergency investigation, and suddenly everyone was scrambling to cover their tracks. I watched it all unfold from my little quality control lab, testing pH levels and trying not to smile. The justice was poetic, really. Marcus had stolen my work, but he'd stolen an incomplete version. His greed and incompetence had created a disaster that would have been completely avoidable if he'd just, given me credit and let me oversee the production. The investigation was thorough. A team of external auditors went through every aspect of the Formula X development process. They interviewed team members, reviewed documentation, analyzed the production protocols. And eventually, inevitably, they found my original research notes. The complete research notes, including the page that clearly outlined the necessity of BX7 as a stabilizing agent. I was called into the boardroom on a Thursday afternoon. The entire executive team was there. The CEO, the CFO, the head of R&D, and several people I didn't recognize but who looked very serious and very expensive. Marcus was sitting at the far end of the table, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. His usual confident demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Ms. Rodriguez, the CEO began, we've completed our investigation into the Formula X situation. We've discovered some irregularities in the development process. I nodded, trying to look appropriately concerned rather than vindicated. It appears that the original formula, as developed by you, included a critical stabilizing component that was somehow omitted from the version presented to the board. Can you explain this discrepancy? I looked directly at Marcus as I answered. The complete formula, including all stabilizing agents, was submitted to Mr. Webb on March 15th. The omission of BX7 was not part of my original research or recommendations. The room was silent. Marcus cleared his throat. There may have been a miscommunication. The documentation was extensive, and it's possible that some technical details were overlooked during the presentation preparation. Overlooked. Right. The CEO's expression was glacial. Mr. Webb, this oversight has cost the company $38 million in recalled product, not to mention the damage to our reputation and stock price. We need to understand exactly how this happened. What followed was the most uncomfortable 45 minutes of my professional life, and I wasn't even the one being interrogated. The board members took turns asking Marcus increasingly pointed questions about his development process, his research methodology, his documentation review procedures. With each question, it became clearer that Marcus had no real understanding of the science behind the formula. He couldn't explain the molecular interactions, couldn't justify the ingredient ratios, couldn't even properly pronounce some of the chemical compounds. It was obvious to everyone in the room that he was trying to take credit for work he didn't understand. Finally, the CEO turned to me. Ms. Rodriguez, if you were to oversee the reformulation and relaunch of this product, incorporating the proper stabilizing agents, what would be your timeline and cost projections? I'd been preparing for this question for weeks. With the complete formula, including BX7, we could have a stable product ready for testing within 6 weeks. The additional cost would be minimal, approximately 12 cents per unit, but the shelf life would extend to 18 months, well within industry standards. And you're confident this would resolve the stability issues? Completely. The destabilization was entirely predictable based on the incomplete formula. With proper stabilization, this product could still be the breakthrough we originally envisioned. The CEO nodded, then looked around the room. I think we have our path forward. Marcus was terminated that afternoon. Not just from the project, but from the company entirely. His departure was announced as a mutual decision to pursue other opportunities, but everyone knew what had really happened. I was promoted to lead scientist and given full authority over the Formula X relaunch. They also gave me a $40,000 salary increase and a project completion bonus of $25,000. Not quite the millions the company would eventually make from the product, but a significant improvement over my quality control wages. The reformulated product launched 6 months later. This time, my name was on the patents, the presentations, and the press releases. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's revolutionary skincare formula was how the trade magazines described it. The product was a massive success, generating over $60 million in revenue in its first year. But you know what the best part was? It wasn't the money or the recognition or even the sweet taste of vindication. It was the moment when I realized that I'd played the long game perfectly. I could have exposed Marcus immediately, could have fought the transfer, could have made a scene in that first meeting. But by staying calm, by letting his incompetence expose itself, I'd achieved something much more satisfying. I'd let him destroy himself with his own greed. The whole experience taught me something important about corporate life, about justice, and about the power of patience. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate retaliation. It's giving someone enough rope to hang themselves with. Marcus, by the way, never found another position in the industry. Word gets around in pharmaceutical circles, and nobody wants to hire someone who nearly sank a major product launch through sheer incompetence. Last I heard, he was selling insurance in suburban Connecticut. As for me, I'm still at Peterson Pharmaceuticals, but now I run my own research division. I have a team of 12 scientists working under me, and I make sure to give credit where credit is due. I've learned to be more careful about protecting my work, but I've also learned that sometimes the best protection is simply being too good at what you do to be easily replaced. The Formula X product line is still one of the company's biggest successes. Every time I see it in stores, I smile a little. Not because of the money it generates, but because it reminds me that sometimes, justice doesn't require dramatic confrontation or elaborate schemes. Sometimes it just requires patience, precision, and the confidence to let the truth speak for itself. And if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, watching someone steal your work, claim your achievements, take credit for your brilliance, remember this story. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting incompetence run its course. The truth has a way of surfacing, especially when the lies are built on a foundation of ignorance. After all, you can steal someone's formula, but you can't steal their understanding of the science behind it. And in the end, that understanding is what really matters. Trust me, I learned that lesson the hard way. But boy, was it worth it.